Constitutional recognition. It's something a lot of Indigenous people in Australia have been campaigning for, well, for a really long time now. But what exactly is it, and why is it such a big deal? Let's start with that first word, constitutional. This is Australia's constitution. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's not that big. It's more like this. It's kind of like our nation's rulebook. It sets out how laws are made and enforced. Although ours is not as popular or as famous as the one they've got over in the United States, which they like to talk about all
the Constitution?
It's in the Constitution.
That's your constitutional right.
Time.
You think the language in the Second Amendment is clear enough? You know, about the right to bear arms?
Of course it's clear. Every American has the right to hang a pair of bear arms on their wall. How could that possibly be misconstrued?
In fact, most Aussies don't even know what's in our constitution, or that it even exists. I mean, I don't really blame them. The Australian Constitution was written more than a century ago. Although it was the first time in the world a country's constitution was decided by a vote, which is pretty cool if you're into that sort of thing. However, when it was written, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people weren't mentioned at all, despite the fact that they'd been living here for more than 50,000 years. And that's something that hasn't sat right with a lot of people for a long time. Okay, so now that we know about that first word, let's find out about the second one, recognition. And we probably don't need this anymore. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to be recognised in the Constitution as Australia's first peoples. It's something a lot of people agree with, and it's been put forward a number of times by PMs in the past. Organisations like Reconciliation Australia reckon widespread acceptance of our nation's history is an important step towards making sure we don't repeat the wrongs of the past. Not everyone's on board with the idea though. Some people don't like changing the Constitution at all. Others reckon it'll cost way too much money, and some reckon that it won't change the past or the lives of Indigenous Aussies today. That last point is actually an argument that's being used by some people on both sides of the debate. Many people who support constitutional recognition also want to add a new part to the Constitution that would make a special group in federal parliament to give Indigenous people a louder voice in their future. This group would advise the government on any laws or policies that affect Indigenous people. The Liberal Party's Minister for Indigenous Aussies, Ken Wyatt, is one of the people pushing for that change right now. Back in 2017, a survey showed that most Aussies support this idea. But the specifics of how much power that group would have is a bit more controversial. This idea was dismissed by our previous PM, Malcolm Turnbull, the last time it was brought up. There were worries that the group would become too powerful and be seen as a third chamber of parliament. But Mr. Wyatt has rubbished that idea and says it's misleading. Similar Indigenous advisory groups have been set up in the past, but supporters of this new change say those groups hadn't received the support that they needed, and that by adding this new group to the Constitution, it would guarantee an Indigenous voice is present and can't easily be cast aside. So, how would we actually go about changing the Constitution to add these new sections in? Well, it's not as easy as changing shirts. Wait, this is too much. That's better. You have to have a referendum. That's a big and expensive national vote that can cost millions and millions of dollars. To get change passed, more than half of the Australian population and more than half of the states and territories have to vote yes to the changes, which is a lot harder than it sounds. The majority of referendums we've had have failed. In fact, only 8 out of 44 have been successful. Former Aussie PM Sir Robert Menzies said passing a referendum was as tough as one of the labours of Hercules, which is probably a bit over-dramatic from Bob. I mean, I'd much rather campaign for a yes vote than fight a giant lion monster. Ugh. That doesn't mean a referendum for constitutional change will fail though. The most successful referendum of all time was actually to do with Indigenous Australians as well. The 1967 vote, which among other things, was about making sure Indigenous Australians were counted in the census. It scored an impressive 90% yes vote. Right now, pollies are saying it will probably go to vote in the next 3 years. So we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you want to see some more cool explainers like this one, make sure you hit subscribe because we've got plenty more coming. And make sure to subscribe to ABC Education too and check out their website. They're both packed with heaps of educational resources that are really handy for students, teachers, and parents.